Around 3 a.m. one night, a woman walked in. She was extremely thin, with blonde hair that was thinning, and wearing what appeared to be pajamas. Nothing seemed particularly strange about her, so I buzzed her in, gave a quick hello, and continued with my cleaning. After a couple of minutes, I looked up and saw her standing about 4 feet from the counter, staring straight at me. It was a blank, unblinking stare. It startled me a bit, so I asked if I could help her with anything. She didn't respond, just kept staring. Eventually, she began wandering around the store, but never took her eyes off me. At times, she even walked backward to keep eye contact. She picked up a few items and came to the counter, still staring and muttering something quietly. It was hard to make out, but after asking her to repeat it several times, I understood she was asking for a certain brand of cigarettes. I got them for her, scanned her items, and she paid. Her eyes stayed locked on me, her face showing no emotion. It was getting uncomfortable, and I was eager for her to leave. As I handed her the change, she suddenly smiled. Normally, this would have eased the tension, but then she started laughing. It was a rough, croaky laugh, somewhere between the noise the character from The Grudge makes and a classic witch's cackle. I guess you could call it a cackle. I tried to stay calm, wished her a good night, and stepped back from the counter. We were both kind of frozen, her laughing, and me unsure what to do. She kept laughing and staring for a few minutes before leaving, walking backward again so she wouldn't stop looking at me. I felt uneasy but assumed she was probably drunk, high, or just dealing with something. Once she was outside and wandered off, I went back to cleaning and tried to shake off the weirdness of it all. About an hour later, while I was mopping in the store, I heard a thud against the window. The front of the store is all glass, and the noise came from right next to me. I looked up, and there she was again. Her hand was pressed against the window, and she was laughing again. I could just hear it as I was close to the door. I must have jumped when I saw her because she seemed to find it amusing, laughing even harder and smacking her hand on the glass. I decided to forget about the mopping and headed back behind the counter. I ended up staying in the back room, where all our security screens are, waiting for her to leave. Took her around 45 minutes to finally go. The whole time, she kept banging on the window, and I assume, laughing. I'm really glad the doors stay locked at night, because I wouldn't have wanted to be on the same side of the counter as her. I don't think she was a real danger, but it definitely freaked me out. I've seen her a few times since then, just walking by outside, but she hasn't come in or stuck around again. I worked nights as a dispatcher in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. I was heading home at 2 a.m. when I stopped to get gas. Looking back, it was foolish to stop at all. The gas station was dimly lit, and no one else was around, but this part of town wasn't usually sketchy. While pumping gas, I noticed a woman, around middle age, sitting on the curb far across the lot. It was a cold night, and it had just started raining. She was soaked and clearly not dressed for the weather. When she saw me looking, she called out. My second mistake that night was talking to her. I felt bad for her, so I went over to see how I could help. Hey, beautiful, I was just trying to get home, but nobody will help me, she said. I'm trying to get to Melbourne, but the cab ride is $60 and I only have $40. Can you help me? Normally, I'd give some change to people who asked, but she seemed genuine. The weather was awful and helping people is part of my job, so I agreed. I told her I didn't have cash, but if she came with me inside, I'd take out some money from the ATM and give her a few bucks. The ATM wasn't working though, so I told her I couldn't help. She followed me outside, chatting as I opened my car door to leave. Then she got in my car. I was too shocked to react at first. She buckled her seatbelt and her whole attitude shifted. She wasn't sad anymore. She seemed excited and jittery. Just take me to my aunt's place, she said. She can give me the money. Alarm bells went off in my head. I wanted to tell her to get out of my car, but something in my gut told me that could be risky. She was acting unpredictably, and she seemed high. I also wasn't sure if she had any weapons. Trying to force her out could trigger a violent reaction. "Where do you want me to take you?" I asked. "Just start driving, and I'll tell you where to turn," she said. I wasn't about to do that. "No," I said firmly. "If I'm going to take you anywhere, I need to know where we're going." She said, "Don't worry, honey. I'm not one of those bad people. I'm not going to rob you or anything. Just drive." I repeated, "What's your aunt's address?" "Circle Bend," she said. "What's the house number?" I asked. She started getting irritated. We were still parked at the gas station. I thought about going inside to ask for help, but she seemed to know the attendant, and I wasn't going to leave her alone in my car. Finally, she snapped, "Why are you asking so many questions? I thought we were friends. Don't you trust me? Is it because I'm black?" I told her, "I work at a police station. It's my job to ask questions like this." That's when she lost it. She started screaming at me about being a snitch and trying to get her into trouble. I was more scared than ever at this point. I just wanted her out, but I had to be careful. I took a risk and said, "I'm not a cop. I just work at the station. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if their ATM works?" My goal was to get her out of my car and then slip away in the store. She liked the idea and calmed down immediately. As we drove, she kept talking, but her thoughts were all over the place. It was hard for her to stay focused on one thing, but this is roughly what she said. "I'm glad we're friends now. I've got a group of people after me. I'm going to come to your job tomorrow so we can arrest them together. Okay?" I responded, "We'll talk about that tomorrow. Right now, you said you're trying to get home, right?" "Yeah, I just need to get to Cloverfield," she said. "Wait," I said. "I thought you were going to Melbourne." "Yeah, Melbourne," she replied. "That's what I meant. The cab ride is $40. "But you said you have $40, I pointed out. "I do, but the cab ride is $60. "Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's place? She lives nearby on Cherry Street." I asked, "Didn't you say she lived on Circle Bend?" "No, baby, I meant Cherry Street," she said. "But it doesn't matter because she won't give me the money anyway. Can't you just take me to Melbourne?" By now, it was obvious she was making everything up, as her story kept changing. We pulled into the Walmart parking lot, and she finally got out of my car, only after I got out first. She followed me into the store. I told her I needed to use the restroom before we could find the ATM. My plan was to call the police from inside the bathroom, but she followed me in. Then things got even weirder. She grabbed my arm and whispered, "If you don't have money, that's okay. But let me ask you something. Do you like getting, well, you know?" I told her no as firmly as I could, then rushed into a stall and locked the door. From inside, I said, "I have some friends at the police station who can probably help you more than I can. Let me call them, and we'll figure this out together." As soon as I mentioned the police, she started yelling again. I kept insisting that they could help, but she screamed that she was leaving and stormed out. I thought it was over, but a minute later, she came back and started banging on the stall door. "Hey, come back to your car with me. I left my beer in your car." I knew she didn't leave anything in my car. She didn't have anything with her when she got in. After she left again, I waited several minutes before leaving the bathroom. I found a store manager who called the police. Thankfully, we were in a different jurisdiction from where I worked, because I was embarrassed by how foolish I'd been that night. I didn't want any of my coworkers responding to the call. The officer who came took my statement and warned me to be more cautious in the future. He said some people asking for help can turn violent, and there had been a recent report of a woman matching her description attacking a Good Samaritan. I learned a valuable lesson about being careful with strangers. I'm just thankful my bad decisions didn't cost me my life. So next time you think about helping someone late at night, think twice. A couple of years back, a close friend of mine moved across the country with his girlfriend to take a job offer he couldn't turn down. The only issue was he didn't want to fly his dogs out right away because they'd be staying in a hotel for the first month. And he was also hesitant to fly them due to health concerns. By the time he found a rental home, he missed his dogs and asked his sister, another good friend of ours, and me to drive them to him in LA. We're from Chicago, so it was going to be a long trip. But with 3 of us sharing the nearly 30-hour drive, it seemed doable. We left early and drove for hours. Along the way, my friend and I decided we'd handle most of the driving and let his sister drive only if we absolutely had to. We were in a bit of a rush due to some issues with the rental agreement, so we couldn't afford to stop too much, except for an 8-hour stay at a La Quinta Inn in Denver. The trip itself went smoothly for the most part, except for getting pulled over just before Utah for driving a couple of miles in the left lane on an empty highway. Oops. After that, we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without any trouble until we hit California and needed gas. I had been driving most of the first day, and after we got pulled over, my buddy took the wheel while I navigated. I was searching for a gas station when we spotted a sign for a small town or ghost town with a mobile station nearby. It was perfect since we were running on fumes. The station was just off the interstate, so we pulled in. Normally, we'd let the dogs out at every stop, but since we had stopped recently and they were sleeping soundly in the back, I decided to just pump gas and let everyone stay in the car. We parked next to an old green sedan, and a short man got out of it and walked toward the shop. There were a few other old cars at the pumps, all empty, and a couple of vehicles parked up near the station, likely belonging to the staff. Everything seemed normal until I swiped my card. The first swipe was rejected, which I figured was just a mistake. I tried again, and the pump told me to see attendant. Annoyed but knowing we needed fuel, I knocked on the window to tell my buddy where I was going and asked if anyone wanted anything. After getting their requests for Gatorade and cigarettes, I walked up to the station. As I approached, I noticed how strange the place felt. It was oddly quiet for being right off the highway, but I shrugged it off. As I stepped inside, things got even weirder. The first thing I noticed were boxes of chips left on the floor, like someone had been stocking the shelves and just stopped. Then, as I looked around, I realized there was no one in the store. With all the cars outside, I expected to see at least one other person, but the place was empty. No customers, no staff, no one behind the counter. That's when it hit me. Where did the guy from the green sedan go? There was no way everyone could be in the bathroom, right? That's when I started feeling uneasy. Something was off. I've always trusted my instincts, and in that moment, they were screaming at me to get out of there. I wanted to run, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to draw attention to myself by rushing out like I was panicked. I kept it cool and headed back toward the car. I was only inside for a couple of minutes, but it felt longer. As I stepped out, I paused to listen. Anything, a flushing toilet, any sign of life, but there was nothing. The dread was setting in as I walked back to the car. It felt like one of those movie scenes where the hero is about to reach the end, but you know something bad is coming. About 25 yards from the car, I saw a man come around the side of the building. This wasn't the same guy from the sedan. This man was bigger, and his expression was unnerving, like a twisted smile. The only way I can describe it is like Nicolas Cage's grin from Face Off before the switch happens. I kept walking, trying not to look too panicked, but when I glanced back, he was heading straight for me. That's when I picked up the pace and hurried to the car. Of course, my friend had the doors locked. To make things worse, the 95-pound golden retriever had taken my seat. My friends hadn't noticed how freaked out I was, nor had they seen the creepy man. I banged on the window and yelled for them to unlock the door. My friend only half rolled the window down to tell me they were worried the dog would jump out if they opened the door. I reached in, shoved the dog into the back seat, and scrambled in, all while my friend finally realized something was wrong. He started the car and we sped off. I took one last look back and saw the man had stopped by one of the pumps, still with that eerie grin on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, packed with people, and after telling my friends the whole creepy story, we got back on the highway. As we drove, we had to pass by that strange gas station again. It had only been about 15 minutes since we left, but all the cars were still sitting in the exact same spots as before. No one had moved. A few miles down the road, I got a call from my credit card company. There had been a $100 charge at the mobile station. The lady on the phone was really helpful and fixed the situation, but she was as freaked out by the story as we were. In the end, we made it to LA and had a great trip, but to this day, I still wonder what was going on at that gas station. And who was that smiling man? In the autumn of 1993, when I was 20, right before starting college, I was working the night shift in the material prep department of a plastics factory. I was the only woman in the department, and at first, my male coworkers doubted I could handle the job, but I proved them wrong and earned their respect. The work was tough, but it got me into the best shape of my life. Around that time, I also broke up with my abusive boyfriend, who was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive and also an alcoholic. That breakup is probably why I ended up in this situation. I had just finished my shift, and it was around 1:30 a.m. My car was almost out of gas, so I stopped at a nearby station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman around my age approached me, looking anxious and scared. She told me she had been at her boyfriend's house, and they had an argument. She had walked to the gas station to use the payphone and call a friend to pick her up. On her way to the station, a car pulled up, and the guys inside started harassing her. With a slight nod of her head, she motioned toward a car parked near the dumpsters. I saw a large, light green car, maybe a Cadillac or Lincoln, with at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said they had threatened her, and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well-dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk, just really nervous and shaken. Without hesitation, I finished pumping gas and told her to get in my car. I would take her home. It was late, and there wasn't much traffic, so I quickly drove out of the station and asked her where she lived. She kept turning in her seat to look behind us to see if the car was following. When I told her to put on her seatbelt, she ignored me and continued looking back. I assumed she was just scared. A few blocks down the road, though, she began asking me about money. "Where's your purse? Where's your bag? Give me money." My stomach sank. I thought, now this woman is going to rob me. But then I realized that didn't make much sense. I was driving an old 1985 Chevette, which I jokingly called the shitbox, and wearing my work clothes, an old t-shirt, jeans, and combat boots. I didn't look like someone with much money because, frankly, I wasn't. She twisted around again and started yelling, "There they are! There they are!" Her tone had changed. She didn't seem scared anymore. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and sure enough, the light green car was right behind us. She started laughing and bouncing in her seat, shouting, "My boys are gonna mess you up. They're gonna mess you up." She was laughing wildly, opening the glove box, looking in the back seat, and telling me all the terrible things these guys were planning to do to me. If I had been thinking clearly, I would have driven straight to the police station. In fact, if I had been really smart, I would have called the cops back at the gas station and waited there with her. But none of that occurred to me at the time. Instead, I got incredibly angry. 3 things hit me at once. I was approaching an intersection with cars waiting to cross, the light had just turned yellow. I had a box cutter in the driver's side door, and she still hadn't put on her seatbelt. Without thinking, I floored it and sped through the yellow light just as it turned red. I looked back to see if the green car was following, but traffic had started to move, and they hadn't caught up. The woman started screaming. I slammed on the brakes, and she hit the dashboard and windshield with a loud thud. As she slumped back into the seat, I pulled out the box cutter, pointed it at her, and started shouting like a madwoman. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like, "Get out of my car before I cut your face off." The combination of my screaming and the box cutter worked. She fumbled for the door handle, popped the door open, and I pushed and hit her until she tumbled out onto the curb. I floored the gas, sped off, made a sharp turn with the passenger door still open, and kept turning until I was sure the green car wasn't following me. After a while, I stopped to close the door, then took a different route across town and got onto the highway. About 5 minutes down the highway, the adrenaline wore off and I started shaking. I pulled over to calm myself, then drove the rest of the way home. When I got home, I told my older sister, who I was staying with after the breakup, everything that had happened. She hugged me tightly while also yelling at me for not going to the police. I had never been so relieved to be yelled at.